Right now, we've got Walter Block with us as our guest. He is an Austrian economist and libertarian theorist. He is economics. He is economics and professor of economics at Loyola University in New Orleans, senior fellow with the Ludwig von Mises Institute, the Harold E. Worth. Boy, I tell you, this is a tough one. Eminent scholar, chair in economics, and professor of economics. Had to get that right. Walter, it's good to have you on the line with us, my friend.
It's kind of you to have me on your show. Thank you.
Well, sorry I butchered that introduction. It takes me a long time to filter through your background and just to get the meaningful points out to folks because you're an interesting guy. You and I relate because we're both Austrian economists. I consider myself to be a libertarian. I do not consider myself to be a libertarian theorist. I've not made it to that level yet. And we kind of look at things similarly. Now, that's always a dangerous premise to go into an interview not knowing what you're going to say. But it's one I'm willing to take a risk on. Let's talk about one of our most interesting folks that are out in politics right now, and that's Rand Paul. I know you've got some thoughts on Rand Paul, don't you?
Yes, well, Rand Paul magnificently won the Republican nomination for senator of Kentucky, and the powers that be didn't much like that. The mainstream Republicans didn't like it, and the Democrats hated it. And what they did is they used something that he said in an attempt to brand him as a racist, which he is not at all.
He is not. I watched him live on the Rachel Maddow interview, and I was surprised how many people even misquoted him when they quoted him basically as answering no to a question, and he didn't answer no to the question, and it all had to do with this whole the civil rights issue, and that really wasn't his issue. His issue was personal property.
Right. Well, I think personal property is the key to civil rights. I think, if you have a right not to be discriminated against, which I don't think you do have, that right should transcend whether it's personal or business. So, therefore, if a white person should serve a black person at his luncheonette, he should also serve him at his home kitchen. And since no one would go so berserk as to say that we shouldn't be discriminating against other people in our personal lives, well, then why shouldn't we be entitled to discriminate against people in our business lives?
Well, he was trying to make a very elegant point, and that's what disturbed me, because I thought I was giving him more credit for being a thorough communicator and thinker before he opened his mouth. All he ever had to say was, if it was a private club or a private restaurant, people have the right to do their own private property as they choose, and discriminations. I am like Rand Paul. I thoroughly reject anything that is discriminatory against anybody. It's not me. That's not my style. But if somebody they own their own property, it's not the government's right to tell them what to do. And the government is usurping more and more of the rights of the average American and telling the Americans what they can and can't do with it. So, needless to say, the question came out in a public restaurant: could a white owner deny service to a black man? And he was caught in a trap that he should have answered the question directly and said no, not in public facilities, but in a private club. You may do what you want, and that would have ended the whole thing. But he kept going with it. Well,
it certainly would have ended the whole thing. But as a libertarian, I think that a white man or a black man has a right to discriminate even in a public restaurant. That is not a public restaurant, but a privately owned restaurant.
Sure. And that would have been a great question for him to ask in return. Could a black man keep a white man from sitting down?
Right.
I don't understand how we end up turning good folks into racists by asking these really what is a trick question. And he wasn't very bright for allowing himself to be suckered into this interview with Rachel Maddow either.
Well, that's a whole different issue, but I think it's very important that the American public realize that while the Civil Rights Act of 1964 had many good aspects to it, there were some bad aspects to it also, and namely it was an invasion of private property rights. I open up a restaurant, and I should be able to serve whoever I want. And if people force me to, then we have a loss of the freedom of association.
Tell me why else that's such a bad thing. Why is it such a bad thing that the government can dictate almost entirely what you can do with your own private property?
Well, I think it's horrible. It's really slavery if you're forced to associate with people that you don't want to associate with. I'm never tired in this context of raising the sex issue, and the sex issue here would be that both homosexuals and heterosexuals are discriminatory on the basis of sex. For example, they refuse to go to bed with half the human race or to consider them as potential lovers. The only group that is free of this sort of prejudice or discriminatory behavior are bisexuals, because they will not preclude anyone.
Well, they're just greedy.
Sex. I'm sorry?
I said bisexuals. They're just greedy. I'm sorry.
Well, we should have, in other words, if this philosophy that pervades the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is held seriously, we should have compulsory bisexuality, which is crazy.
Yeah, like Woody Allen said, the great thing about bisexuality, it doubles your chances for a date on a Saturday night.
Yes, but that's a good thing about it. But you don't want to be forced into it.
No, and I think that's with the very poor humor I'm attempting to put forth. The whole issue is about personal property. It's allowing you the God-given right to live the life the way you choose. If you are black and you want to hang out with only black people, you should be allowed to do that. If you're white and you should be allowed to do that, because in this country you work. But you buy your property, you own your property, and you should have the right of free association. You should have the right to do what you want to do. But in public, there's a whole different standard, and in the government, it's a whole different standard. But in private property, you should be able to do what you want to do on your own private property. And behind closed doors, that whole thing, and that's where you get into the Austrian economists, where that intersects libertarian theorism.
Well, that's true, but we do consider restaurants that are open to the public to be private property, right?
Well, I know, but that's what Rand Paul was trying to argue, and he was just mauled by a very malicious Rachel Maddow.
Yes, one of my favorite characters in history is Malcolm X, a black person who set up these Shabazz stores, which really didn't want to serve whites, and certainly blacks have a right to open up a laundromat or a luncheonette or a shoe store or anything, and just say this is only open to blacks.
And what happened to the days where somebody could say, they have a building, they have a restaurant, they have whatever it is, and I walk up there and they say, you're not welcome, you're old, you're white, you're fat, you're this, you're that, whatever it is. And I just walk away and say, well, if you don't want me, I don't want to be here either. And you walk away. I don't understand. We're going so far the other direction right now that the government intervention, the cure, is worse than the problem.
Yes, I agree with you entirely.
All right, let me shift your gears for a second, because we've talked about before a little bit about when Katrina happened, that the levees in New Orleans wouldn't have failed if they were owned by a private corporation. And I think in general I agreed with that. I've got Dan Jensen sitting here with me, and he was on the show last time you were on. And in general I agree with that private companies do a much better job of maintaining things than do government entities. So my question goes, what about the spill in the Gulf? How do we relate the spill in the Gulf to the levees in New Orleans?
Well, no one says, I certainly wouldn't say that private enterprise never makes a mistake. Remember, private enterprise is manned by human beings, and human beings are fallible. The benefit of private enterprise vis-a-vis government is that when a private individual, whether it's BP or levees or whatever it is, makes a mistake, they lose money. And if they lose a bit too much money, they go broke, and thus we have this automatic feedback mechanism which works against mistake-making. On the other hand, suppose the government makes a mistake, as they did in Katrina with the levees and FEMA. Well, the Army Corps of Engineers is still in business. FEMA is still in business. I guarantee you that if BP is not out of business, bankrupt, they will have suffered a grievous economic setback after they get finished paying off all the damages that they've caused. So there's no guarantee that in the private market there'll be no mistakes. There are plenty of mistakes. There's bankruptcies all the time, which is good because you get rid of mistake-making people and then you bring in other ones. But in the public sector, take the post office. They make mistakes all over the place, and they're still in business. Yeah,
I think the old phrase, I used to use this with a gentleman I worked for, and it was a standard joke because there's a lot of nepotism in the company. And I used to joke about it. I said, there is no downside for bad performance in this company. There's no downside for bad performance in the government. It takes you years to fire a government employee, and most times they're just shuffled around to some other department because they're too afraid of being sued by the unions or something else. So the bureaucracy will last forever. The employees will be shuffled around to somewhere else, and there is no downside for bad performance. There is no reinforcing loop there that says if you make a mistake, you suffer.
Precisely, and that's the precise advantage of markets over government. And also, if we only had government, nowadays the employment statistics look very bad, except there's a lot of government jobs being added with the census and this and that and the other. But if we go in that route, and government takes over all the jobs, not only can't they go broke, but then, as Ludwig von Mises pointed out, you have an irrational economy where they can't plan their way out of a paper bag.
I want you to tell everybody very quickly what the Ludwig von Mises Institute is, and specifically, because I call myself an Austrian economist, tell me the difference between an Austrian and a Keynesian economist in the most simple language possible for our audience.
Well, the Mises Institute, as its name implies, is a independent scholarly think tank that promotes the scholarship of Ludwig von Mises. They have seminars, they publish books, they support scholars, among whom I am one. What's the difference between Austrianism and Keynesianism? In 3 or 4 brief sentences, the Keynesians believe that the market is imperfect, that it'll either go too fast or it'll go too slow. Too fast means inflation, too slow, unemployment. And what the government's got to do is step on the gas when we're going too slowly and hit the brakes when we're going too fast, and that's pretty much Keynesianism in a nutshell. Whereas the Austrian view of the business cycle is that the market does have within it the ability to self-regulate itself, neither going too fast nor too slow, and that the reason we have depressions like of the 1930s variety or the one that we're undergoing now is because governments, through fiat currency, through the Fed, through central banking, by getting off the gold standard, have perverted the economy, and that's why we have these malinvestments and business cycles.
And let's make sure that everybody knows who Keynes was. Everybody who thinks that they know something about economics, they know the name Keynes, so they throw it around. They say, oh, it's a Keynesian theory. They have no idea what they're talking about in a man. This man, Keynes, was a social democrat, the closest thing to a communist you're likely to find, and his whole philosophies were that the government intervention is essential, where the Austrian school says government intervention is not only not essential, but it works better without it. So what you've really got is people referring to what was ostensibly a socialist or a communist and working off of his philosophies of the economy and trying to integrate it into a capitalist society. And we wonder why we've had these massive swings, these massive bouts of inflation and depressions and recessions, all with the Federal Reserve firmly in charge since the early 1900s, since 1913.
Not only a socialist and a social democrat, but even a Nazi. In Keynes's preface to his 1936 edition, that is German translation, he goes so far as to say that the German economy of 1936, which is Nazi, is the closest to being similar to his kind of economic analysis, or his economic analysis applies most closely to the Nazi economy.
So the next time somebody brings up Keynes in your conversation, you can safely say, "Oh, do you mean the communist? Oh, do you mean the Nazi? Which Keynes are you referring to?"
Yes, that's a very good ploy. I'll remember that one.
Yeah, I'm known for those pithy. Walter, let me tell you, man, it is always a pleasure to have you on. I'd love to spend an entire day talking with you, because the philosophy of the combination of an Austrian economist and a libertarian is so fascinating to me, and I don't think the average American really understands how liberating this combination really can be. Let me tell everybody, if you want to go check out Walter Block, go out to walterblock.com, and you can read all about him. You can get his publications. You can see his papers. He's a great guy. Walter, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, great to have you on.